So let's go ahead and get started with our session on ArcGIS StoryMaps in higher education. This session will be facilitated by Dr. Dave Cowan, a professor emeritus, taught many years at the University of South Carolina, and now works with Esri on several projects, including taking a deep dive into the use of ArcGIS StoryMaps in higher ed. So with with that, I'll invite Dave to get us going.
Thank you, Angie, and good afternoon to everybody. We're excited to be with you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this session of the Virtual Education Users Conference. As Angie said, I'm Dave Cowan. I'm a professor emeritus from the University of South Carolina. Perhaps more importantly, I'm Esri customer number 7. I've been creating and teaching GIS for 52 years now. Jack honored me with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2007, but actually I'm still here, so it's still having fun doing GIS. In fact, my family is a 3-generation GIS family. I think the only one in existence now. Over the past 7 years, I've worked very closely with Alan Carroll as he has guided the StoryMaps team to the creation of an exciting tool that has exploded in popularity. Today, I'm filling in for Alan as he helped his daughter move to Iowa to further her writing career. It's a very exciting opportunity for that family. My job is to introduce our panelists and to keep us on time. Rather than convening before the regular show, the Education Users Conference is meeting a couple weeks after it. While I miss the face-to-face interaction with friends and former students, I believe the virtual conference was a big success. I especially enjoyed the workshops. We've invited 4 very experienced users and instructors to share their experiences with integrating StoryMaps into the college experience. We're fortunate to have 4 members of the StoryMap team with us today who know what's going on and what to expect in the future. We've selected 3 individuals who are deeply immersed in providing support for StoryMaps at major universities, including 2 that did not have a geography department. They will describe the way that they have successfully structured StoryMap activities across their campuses. The 4th panelist is a professor, history professor, who has been investigating the potential ways that tenure-track professors can get academic rewards for the hours that they invest in producing StoryMaps. So let me give you a quick update on StoryMap status. StoryMaps have grown over the last 8 years, starting with 120 in the first year, and now Alan estimates that there's over 1.25 million StoryMaps, and those are all outside the firewall. So these are ones that are publicly accessible. Alan's very excited about the fact that non-government organizations and federal agencies have taken a great interest in StoryMaps. Lots of different organizations use it as their way of communicating. It's sort of interesting to look at the way StoryMaps are used across the classroom, but also, there's government, there's private, a lot of interesting private sector work. A lot of real estate agencies are finding that. But Alan was a little bit surprised that the education sector has been so popular. But I'm not at all surprised. I followed this very closely, and I think it's just amazing. In the session we just had before here was about librarians. I think there was a great opportunity for librarians and the university academic libraries to be the focal point for spreading StoryMaps and other activities. I'm going to encourage you, conclude by encouraging you to migrate to the new ArcGIS StoryMap application. That has a very tight integration to ArcGIS and ArcGIS Pro. It includes exciting new builder that enables you to add immersive blocks or sidecars, slideshows, guided tour. Provides an easy tools to format text and themes. Provides access to 12 or more ready-to-use base maps and a really neat little express mapping tool. It allows you to incorporate audio, and you can even print a PDF. I am impressed by the amazing work that the developers have done to add functionality, but also the StoryMap team to provide resources for learning and developing. effective story maps. These resources are easily found. I put this particular page up here because I know it reflects Alan's mission. He not only wants people to make story maps, he wants people to make good, interesting, exciting story maps. So the resources that the team has put together are just phenomenal. And you can find that at this particular location. Find us at Esri.storymaps or .com, that's StoryMaps. You can get to the resources. They're easy to get to. They're easy to get through. I also encourage you to go and look at the workshop that was done at the main conference, 1-hour session hosted by Alan called ArcGIS StoryMaps, What's New and What's Coming. So I really encourage you to do that. Now, my job now is to introduce the first speaker, Miriam Olivares, GIS librarian at the Marks College, or Marks Science and Social Science Library at Yale. Miriam's been doing this stuff for 19 years. She coordinates GIS support across higher education. And she previously was at Yale, at Texas A&M, where she formed a great program. And now she's been at Yale for several years. Kind of a neat thing is Miriam's been acknowledged as one of the great women in GIS, part of a 2-book series that Esri Press has now put out. Her interdisciplinary research includes crime analysis, natural hazards, marine conservation, among other subjects. She's going to talk to us about promoting geospatial technology in higher education through story maps. Miriam, you got it.
Yes, thank you. I assume you hear me and you see my screen, right? Yes? Good. Can I continue, David? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for the introduction and for inviting me today. I want to share my experience as a GIS educator with StoryMap, but also the main focus is why StoryMap is so good. I started learning GIS. I got exposed to GIS in Australia during a study abroad, and I started after that learning since 2001, and then I joined the GIS library world in 2008, and I thought I was a good educator until in 2011 the StoryMaps was developed and my world changed. I'm not endorsing a platform. What I'm doing is like I really have taken advantage of it, and I just want to share what I think about GIS. So let's move on and talk about it. So the background, what I have learned, I want to share with you what I have seen, what I have learned, or we have learned as a group, because many of us are involved, and then how we are leveraging on those lessons learned. So story maps are, since they were developed, I think we started little by little integrating that, and that was even before I came to Yale, but when I came to Yale, it was already in place. The instruction for story maps are always well received. It's not difficult to bring people together. It's easy to teach, and also it's easy to increase the complexity. That means that you can start with little concepts, and as people move on, the users, you can add more GIS analysis. I hate to say this, but in some of our workshops we say, even if you don't want to add maps, you can still use the story maps for presenting your ideas. So one thing that is, I believe that I have seen over and over in the eyes of people when they start learning and using the platform, is that I think it connects their technology curiosity with this humanity that we all have to tell a story. Some are more talkative than others, but we want to tell a story one way or another, even if it's through writing and you don't want to talk. But a story map is a great way to serve that need that we have. So what we have learned is like, story maps are accessible. Everyone can create a story map. Doesn't matter how high or low your skills for tech platforms is progressive learning. As I mentioned before, it helps a lot because you can introduce GIS concepts. As GIS educator is important because allows you to scale up as you see the users or the students or the researchers to acquire a skill so they go to the next thing. As a GIS librarian, I really don't want to bring a stress to our users, and I go at the pace that they need. I think that is a key to keep the relationship and letting them to come back to you. Story maps are flexible. It allows creativity and also the feasibility to make things happen. And every time there's a new development and they release the new release, I get really happy to see what is available to integrate into the story maps. It's enticing. We always have large attendance and follow-ups. People get engaged, they come back to us, and the collaboration also is very important. And one thing that I've seen is that it promotes self-learning. What do I mean by about that? Is like once they start making their story maps, it doesn't matter if you reach out to them or not, they always finish their story map. Just I'd love to hear from you, but that is my experience, that other projects get stagnant, but a story maps says we even had a student, I heard after some training, that went and did the wedding invitation through story maps. So always the workshops are packed. Of course, when you have Ross Donahue and Alan Carroll and on campus, it happens like this, but look this beautiful picture. This is music to my ears, like coming to a classroom like that is like, what else can you ask as a GIS educator? So demographics, I thought I knew what was going on, but this summer I had the privilege to work with a GIS intern. I'm so lucky to have Jennifer Lopez. She's in the audience. You can send her an encouragement note to her. She did the analysis of our data for registration and attendance, and look what I found. Graduate is the majority of our users, and I am happy to see that because there's something on the works that I want to share with you that is a plan to bring more undergraduates to start using more story maps. And this is the Yale StoryMap Network. That is a club that we launched here at Yale. And let's explore this idea, and I'm just gonna share a few things about it. I actually lost track of time, but I think I'm okay. So the Yale Story Map, I'm gonna go there in a second. I just wanna tell you that the kind of use that story maps I've seen here at Yale has been for very important research happening on campus. Researchers have seen the need to create a story map to tell the story and to disseminate the findings and emphasize the importance of the message that they want to convey when they are conducting a spatial analysis. In this case, we created this when COVID hits home is through the Yale COVID Mapping Initiative. And then this one is a group that I'm gonna show in a minute that is working in incarceration and COVID. This in particular is a story map that was created for the authors of the book City on Scene, Dr. Karen Cito and Meredith Riva. So I invite you to take a look of that story map and also to buy the book, which is beautiful. The Sustainability Office also launched a very relevant and official story map for campus, a student doing their work for the entire master's degree. And this is one training that I offered with a geospatial consultant, and we use a story map for that. And there's faculty members now also deploying lessons. So what I wanna show you lastly is the StoryMap network. This is a work in progress, and with the COVID and the quarantine, it has slowed down a lot the decision making, but there's a lot of people that have been part of the story maps and many units, including the Digital Humanities Lab and forestry, there's several units, and especially Sarah Smiley-Smith, an associate dean for research. She's been fantastic supporting this idea and endorsing it, I guess. We hope that this becomes a club, a student-led club, but in the meantime, the GIS librarian can do the time-consuming work. So this is just the story map to tell you what it is about. We plan to highlight some of the projects, and then we have a list of the events that had happened in the past, different things that we have done. And then coming up, we will have an undergrad ambassador. We are already in discussion, and I think we got an ambassador for undergrads. And graduate students graduate too soon, so we need to find a new one. And we hope that a faculty member also wants to join us, because they've been integrating a story map into their teaching. And then we have the list of upcoming events. We will have meetups, office hours, and many things that I'm going to be using. I particularly have to make sure that everybody learns GIS throughout the year, and we'll use the club to help with that. So, David,
Miriam,
I'm going to finish. I'm going to finish here. Yes.
Hey, what a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. The next speaker is going to be Shanna Croson. Shanna is the academic technologist at the College of Liberal Arts, University of Minnesota, the main campus in St. Paul. And anyways, while working in the K-12 academic technology, she was introduced to GIS and through Esri's Institute. She now works in higher education, and she continues to work to incorporate spatial thinking across disciplines. She's going to talk to us about StoryMaps, infuse spatial thinking across all disciplines. Terrific. Shanna, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Thanks so much for including me in this panel today. I'm really excited to be here. I do want to say I proposed one topic or one title, and as I was working on this presentation, I shifted it a little bit, and I'm going to say that my subtitle here, How Story Maps Impact Learning, is really what I'm going to talk about today. How we've seen at the University of Minnesota, how it really, story maps really impact also GIS, geography, spatial thinking, but we've also seen it really impact learning all over the place. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. As Dave said, I work at the University of Minnesota. We have 5 campuses around the state. Our primary campuses that have been using story maps are the Twin Cities campus here, our UMD Duluth campus, and the Morris campus out here. But we are a large university. I couldn't tell you how many people, but as of this past Monday, we had over 12,696 members of our ArcGIS Online organization, and it's growing all the time. Last year, we had over 1,300 classic story maps created or edited, and I believe, I'm not sure about the data here, that we had approximately 1,300 story maps in the new builder built in the last year since it launched a year ago. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I really want to share about is what we are doing at the University of Minnesota. We have a story maps curriculum team. We were very lucky to get some support for this, to set this up. And really, this has been a tremendous group to work with. I'm very honored to be working with this. We have a team made up of people across campuses from a variety of disciplines. We talked a lot today about libraries, and we do have people from the libraries that work with us. We also have GIS. Melinda is a GIS specialist in the library. We also have the GIS support is done through spatial, which is a separate unit. We have some people from spatial attached. I come more from the pedagogical instructional design angle, so that's where my role is in this. And we've been fortunate to have a grad student working with us for 2 years, and like Miriam said, they'd leave us too soon, and unfortunately he has to go work on his dissertation. We tried to convince him otherwise. But this team works together to support the use of story maps and really promoting spatial thinking across disciplines all over the campuses. We'll work with any department for any type of thing. We focus on instructors who do not know GIS. We don't expect them to know what GIS is, most of them have never heard of ArcGIS, but they just think that they want to try using this tool. Our process, we meet with instructors to plan the assignments. Really, I think one of the most crucial things we do is we work with instructors to find, create, curate data that makes it easy for students to have success, instead of spending all their time finding the data, which we encourage at other times. Sometimes this assignment needs to be very focused. They don't have a ton of time, and we want students to be successful instead of find the frustration. We work with faculty to scaffold assignments. We recommend storyboards and scripting before students turn them in, so there's a step along the way. We've created a lot of grading rubrics because that's a big question. They know how to grade papers, but faculty don't know how to grade story maps. So we've worked on that. We visit classes and do training, and we do hold workshops. And really our goal is to have students become map makers. And I just love this quote from a student, how effective it is to communicate information to their viewers. We'll talk about that in a minute. We do have a StoryMaps site, and I'll put this in the chat later if someone wants to, storymaps.umn.edu. I'm not going to go through this, but it does have sample prompts. We have a gallery of student work. You can feel free to explore that. We have instructor resources, which include sample assignments, so instructors find that and adapt those assignments for their own classes, writing guidelines, how-to videos, and more. We do work a lot with faculty on spatial thinking. That is, in some disciplines, not a natural thing, so we really work with that. This is just the rise of story maps that we've seen. This number, of course, was impacted by COVID, so our numbers weren't quite so high. And our numbers for fall are looking really great. And I actually just this morning talked to a Spanish instructor who's going to do 2 StoryMaps projects in her classes. So we're really excited about that. I told Alan Carroll I'd bring this up. The new builder has been a game changer for us. We did not start using it until January. We were waiting for a few things, but it has really reduced the amount of technical support we've had to give, and that's been great. Autosave, love it, absolutely love it. We are being able to more focus on pedagogy instead of technical support. Some challenges, Miriam mentioned this, sometimes the map gets a little bit less important with the new builder, but that's okay. We really hope that the story leads to map, and we have been seeing that, and I could talk about that in a non-8-minute presentation. Group work remains a challenge, and I know that's an issue. We've talked about that, and representing time, especially BCE dates, is a problem. I love this quote, had to focus on geography more than I would. I wanted to just talk about some impacts where we're seeing real surprising impacts. We're in writing. So this has really become a project where we're collaborating with the university's Writing Center to focus on how story maps can become a way to teach writing. I am super excited about that. This has gotten us into all sorts of classes and opportunities that we hadn't intended. These quotes here are just things from students that you can see. The places we've seen impact, spatial thinking and analysis, that's sort of an obvious one, but that goes into class, languages, all sorts of different disciplines. Multimodal writing, that piece has been very impactful, how to write with images, how to write with visuals, how to write with maps, reaching to a broad audience, students as content creators, and really empowering students to look at material in ways that they could not have done so 10 or 20 years ago. I'm a historian by trade, and the GIS and this type of thing has really allowed, I think, historians to look at content in a different way. And we really see that in the fact that a lot of history classes have been working with us. And we see faculty come back over and over again to work with us. I wanted to share just a little bit about some evaluation work that we've done. And now I need to move all of you out of my way. We have surveyed students who have done this, and we've interviewed faculty. So I just wanted to share some of that information that we've gotten in these evaluations. This Spanish instructor for a second semester Spanish said this was the best ever final presentation for second semester Spanish in 20 years of teaching. She's the one who I just met with today. We're going to do 2 story maps assignments in her beginning Spanish section this fall. Super excited about this. Is some evaluations from students. We asked students to compare writing a traditional paper to doing a story map. How much did you learn? Oh, and of course you can't see that. Anyway, if it's red, they learned less than a paper. If it's purple, they learned about the same. And if it's blue, they learned more than a paper. So, that's pretty good. What I love about this one is in terms of how many new skills did they learn. It was by far, they learned more skills by doing the story map than by doing a paper. And we were very gratified to see that result. In terms of writing, we asked about how the story map format was different than writing a paper, and most of them said they had to write a little differently. There's some really interesting comments in that about how it impacted their writing. And learning skills. Again, they're not just, they are learning GIS skills and spatial thinking skills, and those are crucial, but it was unexpected to us to find how many other skills that students learned. One of the comments that's come up quite a bit is the creativity, the opportunity to be creative, and how much they enjoyed having this type of visual creative project to do instead of just a traditional paper. I will not go through the examples, I'm running out of time, but these examples that I put here, I just shared some of the ways that we have been doing this. Again, we've really gone from individual and small group projects like papers up to these larger class projects. Survey 123 has been, again, a game changer, figuring out some ways to use Survey 123 for a minimal amount of time on the student, but have a big impact on the learning. And that's been very exciting for us. So I think
Shanna,
I will
thank you
leave it
so
there.
much. Terrific. Wonderful resources, wonderful evaluations. There's some really valuable things that we can take from that. Our next speaker is Peter Knoop. Peter is the IT advocate for the College of Literature, Science, and Arts at the University of Michigan. Sort of an interesting place. Doesn't have a geography department, hasn't had a geography department for about 45 years. But Peter's been doing some wonderful work there. Peter is a research computing consultant at the university. He first encountered GIS as a paleoceanography. It's a field I'm not quite sure about. As a graduate student, he currently works with researchers from archaeology to zoology as an advocate for and collaborator on using GIS cloud computing in research and in teaching. He's going to talk to us about the use of StoryMaps in digital humanities. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we use StoryMaps across the board in our curriculum, but I thought I'd pick some semi-related examples to try and pull together hopefully a somewhat coherent story. If we look at StoryMap usage across the university, I think one of the interesting things to look at here is how rapidly we're seeing the change to users with new ArcGIS StoryMaps as opposed to the classic apps. We've already a little bit past halfway through the year, but have almost as many new ArcGIS StoryMaps as we've had the year before. I think that speaks pretty well to the choices the StoryMap team made in terms of which things they implemented first, though hopefully we'll see all the functionality we have in the classic maps there eventually. We've also seen an interesting trend in that in courses that are using StoryMaps, only about 15% even bother to mention StoryMaps in the syllabus. And I think that's really just reflective. You don't see Adobe Acrobat Reader or PowerPoint mentioned in syllabi anymore. StoryMaps has just become another tool that people can use. Another interesting trend we've seen, though mostly anecdotal at this point, is we have students who start with StoryMaps who go on to do other things in GIS. So it's a great entry or gateway to getting started with GIS. So a lot of our projects and courses are group StoryMap projects. And we certainly have research projects as well, where we have a team of folks working together, but the courses are often the larger challenge. And why would you want to do a group StoryMap project? Well, often the collaboration skills are part of the educational goal for the assignment. But one interesting thing we've seen, particularly for StoryMap users the first time, instructors get gung-ho about StoryMaps, assign everyone to do their own individual StoryMap, and then realize how complicated it is to grade StoryMaps. And so we often see StoryMap group projects now in courses to help lower the grading load for the instructors. We sort of see two kinds of editing when it comes to these groups. If you're using a regular group, you can achieve sort of the goal of distributed editing, where individuals work on standalone pieces and aggregate it together with a collections or a StoryMap series. And that works well for the kinds of assignments that you can break down relatively evenly. We also see a lot of use of collaborative editing with shared update groups, or formerly known as Access and Update. Now, this does require some organized coordination, and we've seen students use Google Docs, WhatsApp groups, text messages, just some way to make sure that no one else is editing the StoryMap when you're editing it. And we've decided, since it's such a popular request with this collaborative editing, that we're going to follow the lead of the University of Minnesota, and we're granting shared update group privileges to all of our users starting in fall of 2020. Now, if you're thinking of doing this as well, I will point out that it is incompatible with the new member defaults option. So if you're using that to automate your management of ArcGIS Online, unfortunately requires you to do a bit of scripting to get around it at the moment, but hopefully that'll change in the future. So let's look at some examples of StoryMaps now. This particular one sort of falls under the category of research and public outreach. It's a group of students working with a faculty member that have been documenting human rights abuses in Africa. And they put together 80 classic story maps documenting these case studies so far. And they really like it because it's easy to author, professional looking, you get interactive maps. One interesting thing about this project is they started with an anonymous public account in 2017, in part because some of the colleagues of the lead faculty member here at other universities have been banned from traveling to certain countries after starting on this project. But in 2020, earlier this year, we got a large student group working on this, which decided to take it public. And they felt more comfortable with us now. These story maps have been shown for the last several years at United Nations meetings in New York and other locations. And so they've gone public. And as part of that, we got to move it to our organization, which also gave them a lot of the additional capabilities you get with an organizational account that aren't there with the public ones. And one of the nice side effects, I think, of this project is we get to tackle some additional educational goals. These students are getting experience with social media marketing campaigns, how they promote these maps on Twitter or Facebook or other platforms. In particular, they're now also encountering getting blocked in some cases due to the new rules and restrictions Twitter and Facebook have put in place. They're learning how to use Google Analytics to help track the success of these campaigns. And because it is a group of undergraduate students, there is a fair amount of turnover, but it's also great for peer training for the students that work on this particular project. The next example I wanted to share is this sort of notion of coursework as scholarly work. And so we have a large group of folks in history and a few other departments that are part of this documenting criminalization and confinement group. And I'm going to focus in particular one group led by Matt Lassiter with a large team of students in the Policing and Social Justice History Lab. This starts out as StoryMap students are producing in an undergraduate course, and they can get involved with accompanying extracurricular activities and continue to work on it after the class is over if they want to. Part of the reason for that is often during the short time frame of the class, they can't necessarily get approval from all the archives for materials that they want to incorporate in the story map. And so that's something the team can take care of after the fact, as well as sort of standardizing on the look and feel. And so far, they've been doing this for about 3 years and have produced 2 book-length exhibits that have a lot of story maps embedded in them. And and we'll go over and we'll take a look at it. One of the interesting things about this is they very prominently, in addition to having like story maps, very prominently give credit to all of the students who have worked on these story maps, either as classes or as extracurricular activities. So while they've standardized on incorporating the story maps into the site, the bylines of the original student authors still make it way through, since they're the ones who did the majority of the work. One interesting outcome from this we heard recently is one of the history undergraduate alumni related that story maps was a key consideration in their hiring for a job in the journalism sector, even though that wasn't listed as a requirement. So they were able to show off their work after they graduated because we don't bother to delete students' accounts, and they really appreciated that. Another interesting example is this notion of journals with story maps, so academic peer-reviewed journals. And this is coming out of a project that Magdalena Zabrowski in our American Culture and African American Studies. She teaches a graduate seminar in archives, preservation, material culture, and Black digital studies. They're using U of M archival materials from various libraries and sources on campus. And the goal for the seminar is for the students to produce story maps, but produce them to a scholarly standard. There's new topics each time this course is offered, but in partnering with the library's electronic publishing arm, they're looking at doing a journal with a proposed title, Archives in Black Digital Studies. And if I pop over here to it, their idea is to have something that will look sort of like this. So you'll have a table of contents, probably a lightweight wrapper that Michigan Journals will provide, but these will link off to the story maps that make up the various components. And these have been copyright cleared for the material that's in them. They have references and other things. But one interesting thing I'm going to show in this particular story map, which I thought was a very interesting use of the technology, is that sometimes you have materials that are considered sensitive content. And so they've used a slideshow here to not necessarily put the image front and center and leave it to the reader to scroll sideways to see what those images are. Now, in terms of this journal, Michigan Journals runs about 30 or so of these digital publishing projects. Some of them even have a paper version as well. But the goal here is to have sort of a student-managed journal where the students are sort of the editorial board and work on finding reviewers and handling the peer review process. There's generally a faculty mentor, in this case Magdalena, and then the library facilitates things helping support the publishing platforms. And the digital version here, the hope is to incorporate these story maps as links in a very lightweight wrapper, and then potentially have an optional print version where they might use the PDFs of the story maps as well. This kind of journal costs about $2,000 or so a year to operate, and they're in the process right now of raising funds. Going back to the documenting criminalization and confinement project, since there are a lot of people working on this, they also come up with lots of great ideas. And in this particular story map, a student in the group she was working with was interested in leading readers along a narrative path that explored objects within the spatial context of a photo, rather than perhaps a map. And so we took the approach of turning their not a map image into an interactive web map. And so that provides an experience, get this out of the way, that looks something like this. I'm going to skip over most of the step, but they get to a point here where they ask the reader to consider the story that's told by this photo and some of the objects that are in the photo. And then they start walking the reader through some observations about the materials that are represented in this particular photo. And after they've sort of given the narrative view of it, interestingly, they also give the reader an opportunity to explore and paint. Oops. How did I manage to do that? There we go. Give the reader an opportunity to pan and zoom around the photo and read additional information about what's stored in there. And if you're interested in giving this a try yourself, we put together, of course, a story map that talks about how you can do this with ArcGIS Pro and gives some suggestions for a generic world file with certain scale factors that make it work well to support zooming and panning at pixel resolutions of these images.
Peter, that's really a great innovation that you've just shown us there. And so if we can just get to the conclusion here, because you've got a perfect lead into our next speaker.
Okay, well, the last thing I wanted to share here is we often find a need for cloning story maps on our campus. And while there's the great duplicate story function that was added to story maps in 2020 April, we often need a full clone, which basically means not just copying the text and the images and the quick maps that are in express maps that are in there, but also the web maps and web scenes and feature layers that are owned by the same owner as the story map. And this is pretty easy to do because it's a nicely organized JSON format, but it is undocumented. So this notebook may not continue to work in the future, but if you want to give it a try, there's a link here to the story map that explains all this, which will take you to the notebook. And we often are doing this because when students submit assignments in our learning management systems, we make clones of them so the instructor can have an authoritative copy of record for grading, and the student can't necessarily edit it anymore. But the student also gets to keep a copy to show off their work down the line. And so
perfect.
I'll hand it off here. We had our little wish list, but we'll come back to that maybe if there's time later.
Thank you, Peter. Doing some wonderful things there, and interesting to see the use of some journals, right, and getting the students into preparing things that would actually make a good publication. As I said, that's a perfect lead into our final speaker today, who's John Glover. He's a professor in the Department of History at the University of Redlands. John has been a professor there since 2000, and he's been integrating spatial analysis and GIS in his teaching and research in African history over 10 years. He's been very interested in this idea of how do you put a lot of effort into producing a story map. Is there some way to get academic credit for that? And so he's been working with a group of people who are sort of interested in this topic, and he's going to give us an update on that now. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Good morning, everybody from Redlands. Can you see my screen okay? I assume so. So I'm a part of a group that's been examining the potential for creating a peer-reviewed story maps academic journal. And in case you're new to this, I'll give you some background, some context behind this. We all know, obviously, that story maps have been very successful in the classroom. They've been growing. We're wondering if we can actually translate that success into using story maps for research and publication. On the flip side, of course, creating a story map article can and will be more time consuming than a regular print article. So is there a chance that we might be able to use that extra work and have it pay off and have it count towards one's research profile? Also, some research topics are simply better suited for an interactive story map format, and they would lose some of their impact if they appeared in a standard print article. If you're looking at migrations or movement over time, story maps really allow you to explore that much more fully, especially if they're interactive. Also, story maps are relatively easy to view and navigate for the uninitiated. I've used my own department to do this. They don't have a background in this, but we've been able to basically share my research with them. So it's very intuitive, no offense to my department, but there's a low bar to read and view these. The need then is basically to create a publishing outlet for original research in an interactive story map format for established scholars, postgrads, graduate students, and possibly advanced undergrads too. Such an outlet would require a peer review process to provide the payoff for faculty review, tenure, promotion, and also to allow graduate students to begin building a research portfolio. Dave helped us out in basically exploring the state of the field. Are there any similar journals out there that are doing what we would like to do? And to be honest, specific to our needs, there's nothing. However, there are a number of peer-reviewed online journals that concern or utilize multimedia content and technology, but they're mostly focused on the use of technology rather than a distinct research topic. They're almost focusing on the means more than the end. We came across a lot of pedagogical journals. So again, we're looking more at how you can take a research topic and use spatial analysis and interactive mapping to publish it. There were two journals we came across that stood out. The Online Journal of Visualized Experiments came pretty close to what we're looking for, but they don't have a spatial or a mapping focus. We also came across the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. They have a peer-reviewed multimedia online journal that uses graphical abstracts, diagrams, video, audio to help illuminate research topics. However, the multimedia aspects are mainly supplemental to the article. They're not really the center. Some concerns we have about this proposal: longevity. Considering the recent changes to story maps, will a story map article made today still be accessible 10 or 20 years from now? And kind of a self-serving example, if I wind up writing the definitive classic story map article on migrations in West Africa, will it still be visible or even functional for students and scholars in the future? Also, will the story map journal staff need to provide technical support in addition to editorial help? How will we handle peer review? Reviewing for topical content is very different from reviewing for the spatial content, what would appear in that main stage, so to speak. I, for example, could not review a story map article for content in a historical field outside my own, but I could comment on the spatial aspects of the maps, the presentation. The big question here is, would we have to manage two sets of reviewers for each submission? So that's problematic. Our current proposal is to consider using the ESRI StoryMap gallery to publish StoryMap versions of articles that are simultaneously published in normal text or print journals. This is an adaptation of the electrical engineering journal approach, but it's not limited to just being a supplement. It would actually be the entire article in interactive StoryMap form. One advantage to this proposal is that it would free us from reviewing the article for textual content, as that would be handled by the print journal as a part of its normal process. Editors for the StoryMap gallery would then peer review the article for its spatial and GIS content and presentation. Mutual links could tie the two forms of the same article together and mutually promote the article and the publishing journals. The longevity issue can be partially solved via the ability to export PDFs in the new version of StoryMaps. And there is the possibility that StoryMap articles can be moved offline in the future to preserve their interactive functionality. We still have questions, lots of them. Is there enough demand for this? Are there enough scholars and grad students and undergrads out there to actually give us enough articles to publish? Will institutions and departments accept this form of scholarship? Should issues be multidisciplinary, specific to one discipline? Should they be thematic? We've considered having lay versions of story maps as well. Research reports in the sciences, for example, frequently do this where they're not peer reviewed, but they can still be of great interest to readers and viewers. With this latest proposal, I have no idea if there might be copyright issues. That will be something that we'll have to look into. And of course, in the end, we're interested in your questions and thoughts. Here's my contact info. It's my email address is john_glover@redlands.edu. If you'd like to join our group or at least be included on the emails, we will be sending out a white paper fairly soon that kind of outlines this proposal and asks for comments and help. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Very good, John. So we're moving ahead with that, and John would appreciate any of the academics who have some comments about this to forward that information to him. We're going to try a number of different things. I'm sorry if I cut anybody off, but I think we're right on time. We left some time at the end for questions and answers, and also a little discussion from the StoryMaps team. We're lucky to have, I think, 4 members. Rosemary, Michelle, Ross, and Liz are with us today. And Michelle is going to tell us a little bit about upcoming competitions that would be useful and interesting for higher education people. Michelle?
Yes. Thanks so much, Dave. And thanks to all the presenters. It's been really exciting to see the innovative things that you're doing in the classroom and sharing across the university with students. And we'll be excited to share that with the larger community as well. Another thing we're really very excited about is yesterday we launched our annual StoryMaps competition. The competition this year is a partnership with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We are looking for wonderful stories that address the global goals, the sustainable development goals like poverty, climate change, and equity. It opened yesterday and will close on November 25th. The thing that was probably really exciting to higher education folks out there is that we have 2 tracks to enter this contest. One is a professional track, which is really everybody, including students across the board. Even students can join the professional track, but we have a special track just for students in higher education who are enrolled in school or accepted to school for the fall can enter this contest. The story map we're hoping we'll be sharing globally on several different portals, including the new SDGs Today portal launched by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and hope that these story maps will help inform scientists and leaders and help solve our global problems. So looking at story maps and GIS is a way to address those challenges together.
Yeah, that's terrific. Angie, are you going to handle the question and answer period?
Absolutely.
Very quickly, Angie.
Michelle's more.
And Michelle, just add a little bit more.
Sorry, I was trying to get to that slide, guys. So just a few resources if you want to capture your screen or take a picture. As Dave mentioned earlier, our website, esri.com/storymaps. You can get there. From there, you can get to the product page to make your own story. You can get great sample stories, resources, videos, blog posts, you name it. And from there, you can also get to our blog catalog, but one thing that we did for all of you in higher education is actually created a collection just for you. It has a story about the competition. It has instructional stories, and it also has sample stories from across higher education for you to see what people are doing out there, from students to librarians to teachers as well. And it's bit.ly/StoryMaps for higher ed.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So we do have some questions. So one, which I think could be addressed to all of you, is have you or have your faculty engaged in community university partnerships on StoryMaps? I think many of you have. And follow on, if so, how do you support access for community members to the software? So who wants to dive in with that one? Anybody?
I can just have a quick answer. We're seeing a lot of that happening now. We have a Heritage Studies and Public History program at the University of Minnesota, and that's a group that collaborates. That's really the whole point of the program, is they're collaborating with the community. We have been able to set up some guest accounts with the University of Minnesota that gives guest users a limited access to our organization. They have a pretty full access, and it has a limited amount of time. So that's how we've been doing it. It's been really successful, and to have community partners do the mapping has been awesome, and we're hoping to have them help them then find their own nonprofit accounts.
Great.
Yeah, Angie, I can add,
Sure.
there's been initiatives with students from the city. I can mention two. One is teaching StoryMaps with the city of New Haven. That has been successful and a great partnership. And the other one is Pathways to Science and to Arts, is a program to make New Haven strong. And there was an instance where a doctor joined with DH Lab, Digital Humanities Lab, to teach a full week class. And part of the work for that week workshop was to create a story map at the end. So it was through Pathways, with collaboration with the Digital Humanities Lab, a student from the School of Medicine, and the library helping with the support for story maps. So, and that is involving kids from the city.
Oh, very nice.
As I said, we have a fair number of those sort of partnerships, often as part of service learning associated with courses. And generally we make it so that we make the community members part of our organization for that time period, because they're working alongside the students. And that is also one thing we use that clone notebooks, clone StoryMaps notebook for at the end, is help them get set up with their own ArcGIS nonprofit instance and then move the content off to it, while also leaving a copy in the students' hands to show off the great work they've been doing.
Yeah. John, do you have anything to add?
I'm sure we're doing it somewhere on campus. I don't know specifically myself who's been doing it. Steve Moore is our director of the Center for Spatial Studies. I'm sure he would know who's doing what and how they're doing it. But within my circle, I can't think of any.
Yeah, sure.
Angie, and maybe there's a concern about the license. Whoever.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to address.
Oh,
yep,
sorry.
Thanks, Miriam. No, that's okay. It's all good. So I was going to mention that as part of the education institution agreement, most universities have ArcGIS Hub, and part of what ArcGIS Hub includes is community accounts, so that you can collaborate with organizations in your community. So that's probably the easiest way to support your community members, is to enable your hub. So if you need help with that, talk to your license administrator or your account manager, and then you'll have plenty of accounts to share with the community. This next one is, I think, more of a comment directed to John, which is the Journal of Urban Transcripts may be of interest given the spatial dimension of urban and their interest in multimedia. So maybe that'll help you out in some of your work.
I'll note that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question we'll take a look at or address is probably best to start with you, Miriam. Can you say more about how the librarians help curate data for StoryMaps projects? And then anyone else who wants to speak to that, jump in after Miriam.
Okay. So one thing that I would mention that in many occasions, the data that is used is already on the ArcGIS Online community. So that comes from other users who had shared the data. But if the researchers are bringing their own data, we have an institutional organizational license. And so far, it's been very stable. What we do is that we show them how they can keep the data to themselves, to their group, or if they want to share with the institution but not with the public. So we go through all those sharing parts. And if you are thinking about sustainability and backups, that you need to make sure that you have a copy outside. You rely on the ArcGIS Online, but also you want to have some backups as in any research project. In particular, we haven't had any incident about data loss so far, other than one user erasing the data and not letting us know. But I feel comfortable with what's happening so far, other than I always tell them that they need to keep it somewhere.
Great. Yep. Thank you. Anybody else have a quick comment about that?
We have, I mean, it probably doesn't apply as much to StoryMaps because we don't often get new data started there, but just in general, we try and have someone from our library's archival data team join us for conversations like that, and usually end up taking projects down two paths simultaneously, where they want the great interactivity of web maps and story maps, and so we work with them on that, at the same time working with how to turn it into a data into a text file or a PDF or a format that is amenable to long-term archival storage.
Yeah, very good. And so I think, I don't remember who made these comments, maybe Shana, about curating data so that there was lots of data available for people to work with right away so that they could focus on making the story rather than creating data. And so I would think that the using the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World, there is a huge amount of data there. And then I know that many university libraries, do curate and collect data for the local region or the state. And so those might be great sources of data, to help people sort of jumpstart StoryMap projects. So another question that has come up a couple of times is how are you addressing ADA compliance, screen readers, things like that when working with StoryMaps? So so Shana wants to jump in. Great. Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. That is a huge concern for me, and I'll actually post a blog post I wrote this spring with Esri about writing accessible blog or accessible StoryMap content. It is absolutely an issue that I address when I teach about story maps, how to write headers, how to write appropriately using appropriate alt text for images and for maps, and why to do that. I will post and I meant to talk about that in my session actually, in terms of how to make story maps accessible for people with screen readers. To build them, I think for them to consume them, it is much better, but the building is something we're still looking at. I'll post a link to the blog post I wrote with Esri into the chat.
Fantastic. I should say, does anyone else want to comment on that question? Shouldn't have jumped in. No? Okay, then our next question, I think, is directed to Peter. Could you just say a little bit more about the notebook to clone the story maps and how you would run it?
Yeah, so as long as you have permissions to run ArcGIS notebooks on your ArcGIS Online instance, it's publicly shared from our ArcGIS Online instance. So in the story map that sort of describes what the notebook is for, there's a link there you can click on to open the notebook. And then near the top of the notebook, you need to provide credentials for accessing your own ArcGIS Online instance, and you need to provide the ID of the story map you want to create, and then you just pretty much hit run, and it chugs away for a bit, and out the other end comes a the clone of all the related items.
Fantastic. Yeah, and ArcGIS notebooks are relatively new, relatively newly available in ArcGIS Online. They've been available with ArcGIS Enterprise for a while, but were just released as part of ArcGIS Online in June. So that's the specific thing Peter's talking about. It's new, so you may not have worked with it yet, but it is available, and there's more information, on the website if you need help getting started.